conversation with Nancy Levin. It's Mamta Saha here, and I cannot wait for you to hear this discussion all about how boundaries and setting them will set you free. Nancy, thank you so much for joining me today for this interview. I'm so excited to speak to you.
I am delighted to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
You're so welcome. So I came across your work a few years ago on boundary setting, and I was fascinated because, boundary setting is like a courageous thing to do. And I was like, well, how can it be made easy? Surely it can't be easy. And it's about other people being more respectful. And actually, as I delved more and more into your books, what I learned is actually it's got nothing to do with other people. It's all about you. So, Nancy, how has this passion for boundary setting come about? Have you always been boundaried?
You know the old adage, we teach what we need to learn.
Yeah.
So I would say I lived over 4 decades of my life being boundaryless.
Mm-hmm.
I really prided myself on having no boundaries because I thought that's what made me so excellent at the work I did in the world. And it's what had me be so compassionate, over giving, over loving, people pleasing, peacekeeping, conflict avoiding, all of these things. And I thought it was really part of what had me excel. And what I started to really understand in the process of first leaving my 18-year marriage was that, I lost pieces of myself along the way. And we don't realize the degree to which we've disappeared until we start to recognize that we haven't taken ourselves into account. We haven't made ourselves a priority. We haven't put ourselves at center stage of our own life. And that's really the angle I come from around boundaries, that boundaries are knowing our own personal limits around what we will or will not do, will or will not tolerate, and will or will not accept. And our boundaries are very personal. So it's really about what's okay and not okay for me, and how am I going to honor myself. And you made a reference to you previously thinking boundaries were about other people respecting, right? And that is what most people think. Most people think boundaries are a line in the sand, and that we expect other people to honor or respect the boundary, and we want someone else to change or do something different. And so I will just from the start here say boundaries are not about anyone else doing anything different. Boundaries are about honoring our own limits. And so it's not up to anyone else to respect the boundary we set. It's up to us. And if our boundaries are being crossed, we're the ones crossing the boundaries.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So we set the boundaries, we create the boundaries, and actually anyone around us that we might feel is pushing our boundaries is actually, it's got nothing to do with them. It's all about our perception of our limits and us drawing a line in the sand around what we're willing to accept and entertain. And so is that how you would define boundary setting?
Yeah, I would define, the boundary setting is naming and owning and taking responsibility for these limits that we identify. Yeah. And in order to identify the limits, we have to really get into self-connection. We have to really access for ourselves what is most important to me. What have I been tolerating that's actually intolerable? What have I been accepting that's actually unacceptable? How are the ways that I've been crossing my own boundaries in order to stay in certain relationships? What are the ways in which I am believing that the goal of relating of any sort, whether it's intimate partnership or my mother, what is the way I've been looking at relating as the goal of relating is harmony at all cost? That comes at a very high cost to me.
Yeah.
So we have to start putting ourselves into the conversation, into the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. How do we do that? So, say for example, typical Asian household, mother-in-law, father-in-law, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, their three kids,
Mhm.
and you're just feeling. And I have a client of mine and a couple of clients who are finding it really tough, especially with the lockdown in the UK and globally, actually, and with the holidays just happening and everyone's everywhere. How does one, when they've been exhibiting, like you said initially, you were all about not having boundaries, and I think so many people, and even myself, can um, recognize that behavior, because it's like you just want to be, you just want to harmonize. You don't want any conflict, and we're raised like that. So, for someone who has that DNA and has been acting in this boundaryless way for a while, what's your advice to them? What's the first thing that they should do?
So the first thing is to really ask yourself, are you willing to give yourself permission to consider yourself and your own needs at least as much
Mm,
as you're considering the needs of everyone else around you? So just to bring yourself to the baseline instead of putting yourself on the back burner. Because to your point, what I see time and time again is, and I will use this as a metaphor, but I have been told by many clients that this is literal.
mm,
We will set the dining room table with the fine lace tablecloth, the fine china, the crystal, the silver, the big juicy steak or the big juicy tofu, and make sure everyone has what they need. And then we eat the scraps and the crumbs in the dark in the kitchen, standing over the sink, and we think that is okay.
yeah, yeah, and we're kind of proud of it in a way. A lot of us are proud
Right.
of it. Like, oh,
That's
look what I did for everybody else.
That's right. We
I
wear
ate last.
selfless, right.
Yeah,
We wear selfless as a badge of honor.
yeah,
And I'm also here to help you all reclaim selfishness,
mm,
because I see self love, self care, and selfish
yeah,
as three sisters whose job it is to support us in honoring ourselves. We've disowned selfish to such a degree that
mm,
we go to selfless, but in selfless, we disappear, we vanish.
yeah,
And so this really is about staking our claim in our own space. So, the very first thing is really consider, am I willing to take my needs into account at least as much as I'm taking everyone else into account?
mm,
And just notice what happens in the body
yeah,
as that loads in.
yeah,
And then from there, am I willing to give myself permission to consider my needs even more?
yeah,
Even more than I consider the needs of others. And then the real boundary ninja move here is, am I willing to give myself permission to consider my needs first
oh, I
before
love that.
I consider the needs of others? Now, anyone listening, if you think you heard me say only consider your own needs or don't consider the needs of anyone else, I said nothing of the sort.
Mm,
It's a both and, not an either or.
mm,
But we set things up with either I give myself attention or I give someone else attention.
right,
And I'm simply saying, in order to be able to be of not only the highest service, but in order to actually live your own life as fully as possible, give yourself your own attention first.
yeah. Because Nancy, what's at stake if we don't do that?
Boy. I mean, everything. I mean, really, everything is at stake. I mean,
Right.
without being dramatic, but it's, the sort of, whittling away at our wholeness and our worth, the complete loss of this incredible gift and opportunity we have of being alive on the planet at this time.
Yeah,
Relationships will suffer. Our self-esteem suffers. Everything suffers when we don't put ourselves at center stage. We
yeah,
have it backwards. We think that we have to be self-deprecating, or we have to hold ourselves back in order to maintain relationships. And I'm really here to say that our relationships will thrive and flourish when we really do what we need to do for ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And, even the thought without having a discussion around, you know, what you want to do or how you want to change, but am I willing to give myself that permission to even consider it? Sends
Yep.
out an energy, doesn't it, to the universe? And I
Yes.
think then people pick up on it, because one of the things I was thinking about is that I think fear comes into play when automatically you assume boundary setting is a two-way conversation. And you're like, no, 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 I don't want to go there. I don't like conflict. I'll just bite my tongue. And, I'm reading a really interesting book at the moment by Deepa Narayan. It's called Chup. And Chup basically is in the Oxford Dictionary now, but it's a Hindi word and it means shut up, basically. It just means be quiet. And so many Indian girls and women grow up hearing this at home because it's like, don't have an opinion, don't have a voice. So I think there's an association that, and then so having a dialogue is a learned behavior that people struggle with, and this is where the passive behavior wins, and being a lack of self assertiveness and selfishness comes
Yeah.
into play. So can you shed some light on how boundary setting has got nothing to do with another person or having a full-on fight at home?
Yes. 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 So, two things. One is, I've really come to believe that our fear of conflict isn't about fearing a fight or fearing a confrontation. Our fear of conflict is actually our fear at looking at the fact that the relationship is sinking,
Mm,
that the relationship itself, that the container of the relationship itself doesn't hold water. And so we just want to avoid conflict on the surface because we don't actually want to look at the fact
mm,
that there's a bigger choice that needs to be made. So that's one piece.
mm,
And that is heavy,
mm.
but it's also, to me, very liberating, because it's all of this starts to move us out of blame and victim into responsibility and empowerment.
Yeah, an opportunity. Right?
Opportunity. Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be doom and gloom.
It doesn't have to be doom and gloom.
Mm,
So we don't want to go along with the acquiescing and the agreeing and the saying yes when we want to say no and all of these things. We want to look at the whole of this and start to make choices based on what feels good for us. And so when we are verbalizing a boundary, and let me first say, not every boundary needs to be verbalized, because as I said before, my boundaries are between me and me, whether they involve you or not.
yes,
So even if they involve you, it's a boundary I'm setting for myself. It's not a boundary I'm setting against you.
right. It's
And
just
that's a
your
big difference.
limits,
Yes.
your
So,
parameters.
right. So, my boundaries. So, and the thing is, one of the major reasons people fear setting boundaries is they don't know what to say
Mm,
if they decide to set the boundary verbally. So, if I decide to say it out loud, first of all, I have to know that I have to trust that I'm going to stand by my word,
mm,
because otherwise I'm the little girl who cries wolf.
mm,
So I have to know that if I say a boundary and set it out loud, that I'm going to uphold it. So the other thing is about the way we speak about boundaries, what we say. So a boundary is not you can't or don't or I need you to. That's not a boundary. That's a demand. A boundary is letting you know what's going on for me and what I'm going to do. So, for example, it could be, that my mother calls me 10 times a day
mm,
and I'm working. So the boundary can be as simple as, hey, mom, I'm just letting you know that I get thrown off by all your phone calls. So I'm just letting you know ahead of time. You're welcome to call as often as you like. I won't answer the phone until after 5 p.m. I didn't tell her what to do.
Yeah.
I didn't tell her what she can or cannot do. I simply let her know what I'm going to do.
Mm,
It can be as simple as that.
mm,
But we get this whole, we get this whole worked up thing of, someone's going to be mad at me. Someone's going to be disappointed. Someone's going to be hurt. And you know what? Someone's response to our truth is not our responsibility to manage. That's theirs.
mm.
I don't need to cross my boundary into their territory to manage their emotional experience. I can stay here.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's really, really powerful. And you're not being disrespectful. You're just speaking your truth, like you say, in a really kind way, and um, creating some parameters around what works for you and what doesn't. And I think that it does change relationships, and it changes the way people view you as well. And they do think twice before, maybe your mum would think twice before calling you for the fifth time in the day because of what you said. And Nancy, how do you deal with the repercussions if someone is quite a narcissistic personality and you are trying in your most gracious way to say, it's not okay to talk to me like that, or I feel uncomfortable when you ask me to do that, or whatever it might be, and they just respond with blame and anger. How would you handle that? Boundary guru.
Yes. So two things. First of all, I wouldn't use the language. It's not okay for you to talk to me like that.
Okay.
That is expecting them to do something different.
Right.
It's when you talk to me like this, I shut down. And so should you decide to continue this line of language, I'm going to leave the room. I'm going to leave the house. I'm going to hang up. So I'm not going to tolerate this. I'm no longer going to tolerate you speaking to me in this tone. Instead of telling someone else what's okay for them or not okay for them.
Right. Yeah. There's a fine line, isn't there?
A fine line, and this is where I said before, we have to know that we are going to stand by our word.
Yes.
Because if I say, I am no longer willing to tolerate you yelling at me. And should you continue yelling, I'm going to leave the house. I have to leave the house.
You have to. Yes.
I have to leave the house. And that's the kicker. Because this is where we really have to shift into the energy of knowing that we are so much more powerful than we give ourselves credit for. We are so much more empowered when we take responsibility. And we can change the course of the way we engage, but we have to be willing to do it. So when we're dealing with a narcissist, so in the book, Setting Boundaries Will Set You Free, I in one of the chapters, I go through script writing, how to actually write your boundary scripts.
Amazing.
And it's essentially, I feel X when you do or say Y. And in order to take care of myself, I'm going to do Z, kind of like basically that.
Yes.
When we're dealing with a reasonable human, not a narcissist, when we're dealing with a reasonable human, we can make a request. Are you willing to no longer X? Are you willing to no longer speak to me in that tone? Are you willing to not drink so much at dinner? Are you willing to not call me so often? Whatever. We can make a request.
Yes.
Only if we're dealing with a reasonable human. If we're dealing with a narcissist, it's really, really complex because we can't make a request because the request will never be met. And we are constantly banging our head against the brick wall.
Yeah.
And so that's why I say also, and I speak from experience, I was 18 years married to a narcissist.
Right.
And And, it really erodes your sense of self. And so much of the ability to even know what our boundaries are about being able to step into our sense of worthiness that isn't dependent on anyone outside of us.
Yeah. It's the whole self-love piece, isn't it? And back to that question that you asked earlier, which was, am I willing to give myself permission to consider putting myself first,
Right.
just to contemplate that idea? And what practices would you encourage women to do, even men to do, in situations where there's no let up, there's no room to breathe? What could they do with the few tools that they have?
I mean, I am a big proponent of any practice that will that is self-connecting. So by that I mean whether it's meditation, whether it's journaling, whether it's taking a bath, whether it's dancing, going for a walk, something that is about being with myself, not about being alone, being with myself. And when we're really allowing ourselves to listen to the voices that have been whispering for quite some time, but we've been ignoring, and now they're probably screaming.
Yes.
And we all know what it's like in our lives to shoo away the red flags. And in hindsight, we can see, oh, now I see what happened, or now I see what I didn't pay attention to, or whatever it is, to really start paying attention. And here's what I'll say. I believe that our bodies are our barometer of truth. So our bodies are our boundary barometer. We will know in our body when something's out of whack, even before we can consciously and cerebrally name it.
Yes.
So I do think that a consistent practice of checking in with my body around, because I know, like, if a boundary is being crossed, I'll feel it in my body first, and I'll feel resentment rising. Resentment is a telltale sign a boundary needs to be put into place. I might feel the knee-jerk urge to say yes to something that I want to say no to. And then guilt might come in. Guilt in this context is an indicator I'm taking good care of myself. Guilt is the indicator I'm looking out for me. So to start paying attention to the signals that we've been avoiding or that we've put a label on, that it's not good to feel a certain way, and to start understanding them on a deeper level inside of our body. So these are the ways that we can begin just to check in with ourselves. What's true for me? What's happening for me? What's real here? What am I afraid of? What is the worst case scenario? I have in the book, one of the exercises is around, your dreaded list of consequences. What are those dreaded list of consequences, and how many are really likely to come true?
Yeah.
And then what's the list of exhilarating outcomes from setting the boundary? So there will always be consequences to setting a boundary or not setting a boundary. And we always have a choice about setting the boundary or not. The important thing is to be awake when we do it, is to be conscious when we're doing it. Because if we consciously choose not to set the boundary, it's going to diffuse and lower the resentment. It's going to allow us to be in a more neutral space.
So listen to your body, take time out. If you've only got a minute, take 30 seconds to close your eyes, do a body scan, and notice your reaction to things and pay attention to that, and really contemplate if you're comfortable with what's going on. I think that's a brilliant, brilliant first step. Any other advice, Nancy, that you can give to women who are just too fearful to leave the house or to even put that out there, because they feel their whole lifestyle, connection, everything's ingrained in those four walls? When we know, when you do the consequences and you make those lists, you see that actually there could be life, a beautiful life and better life, if they contemplated it. But if they're so stuck, if they're so set in their ways, what advice would you give?
So part of it is being able to either envision your empowered future, or to be able to actually feel what freedom feels like for you. And you can even be free inside of a restrictive container.
Right.
So part of it is really being able to move into getting the clarity of what does freedom feel like for you, and what is a small, simple, doable, realistic action you can take to feel free. So I have what I call my transformation equation. And that is change equals vision plus choice plus action.
Oh, I
So
love it. It's
thank
brilliant.
you. Yeah. It's simple, but it's, if we want change to happen, we have to allow ourselves to envision something different. So where do I want to be? Who do I want to be? And then we have to be willing to make a different choice and take a different action. So I believe that where we are right now, where you are, where I am, where everyone listening is, we are here. It's a culmination of every choice we've made up until now. So our present moment choices predict our future. Our present moment choices are the crystal ball. And if we don't do anything different, it's like that definition of insanity. Do the same thing over and over, expect a different result, right? If we don't do anything different, our future is going to arrive looking very much like our present and our past.
Right.
So we have, like I was saying before, we have so much more power than we give ourselves credit for about the future that we want to inhabit. What are the choices I'm making today? The choices I make today are informing the future I desire. Every choice we make, every action we take will serve us or sabotage us, one or the other. So that vision becomes the gauge that we measure the choices and we measure the actions against.
Yeah, I love that. It's beautiful. And it shows how much power is in the moment, and why being mindful and just aware is super important. Otherwise, the rut will continue. The hamster wheel will keep turning in the same way and things won't change. And it might be a little bit scary, but I think, as you say, when you acknowledge that the vessel is leaking, then you're able to think, okay, well, what am I comfortable with and what am I not? And what can I shift within myself to start making things feel freer and access my freedom within this container? I think that's amazing, amazing advice. And Nancy, you are running a free course next week. So can you share a bit more information about that? Because I have clients all over the world. So, and I want to join it as well. So
I love it.
Tell us a bit more about it.
Yes. So it's actually based on what I was just sharing. It's called the Transformation Equation Method, and it is a 7-day free coaching experience to really support you in getting the clarity around the change you want to make, the vision that you're holding for yourself, and the micro choices and actions that will get you where you want to go. So it's starting on Tuesday, January 12th. And it's free to sign up. And it's at nancylevin.com/transformation-equation.
So Nancy will tag you below so that everyone can check out how to get in touch with you on Instagram, Facebook, and of course your amazing course that's happening next week. There was one thing that I wanted to do today. So I created these affirmation cards which are on their way to you. I want to do a quick fire round of your thoughts from a boundary setting perspective on these affirmations that I pulled for you. Would you be up for that?
Totally.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so I'm going to just get some energy, Nancy energy. And what am I going to pull out for you right now? Oh, I inhale joy and I exhale love. So, from a boundary setting perspective, I inhale joy and I exhale love. What comes to your mind?
The first thing that comes to me is there's a meditation that I will often do. It's a self-love meditation where um, I'm sending love to the person I love most in the world. And I
Oh,
envision myself sending this love. And then I envision that person stepping out of the way. And then what I do is I envision the same amount of love that I'm sending out to this person I love most in the world, boomeranging in space and coming back into me. And that's what just came to mind.
I
You know,
love it.
we can fill ourselves with our own love in that way.
Absolutely. And we need to make the world a better place, I believe, right? We're just kind of human beings. I'm going to pick the next one for you. I access my personal power. This has your name on it. I
No
access
kidding,
my
right?
personal power.
Yeah. So, you know what for me, where that comes from is accessing my personal power is this piece of really knowing what's true for me, regardless of what's true for other people, regardless of what other people are wanting for me. But for me to really be clear on my own vision and conviction about my desire.
Okay, I love it.
From there, I can really, as I say, I can step into the spotlight of my own life.
I love it. Thank you. And then the
You're welcome.
last one,
Okay.
my potential is infinite.
Ah,
Potential is infinite. I
I
can't
love
wait for
that.
you to get
So
your cards.
yeah, so the first thing that comes to me is I do believe that all of our potential is infinite, and we get dragged down by the fear of the people around us, and we get dragged down by what will everybody else think, by the perception of others, by believing we have to project a certain image to the world. And so I do think that, that it is about knowing that we don't have to um, put on the cape, and, we don't have to sort of muscle through. We can just be and stand in the truth of our own conviction.
And you're right, we don't have to look like a Wonder Woman or like we've got it all together. We just have to know that we have the potential to respect ourselves, value ourselves, and achieve the vision that we want and create the change. Um, and it's not as difficult as it sounds, I think, once, like you said, you connect with yourself, because your body will guide you, won't it? There'll be a message in there.
Absolutely. And we just need to tune in. We just need to allow ourselves to listen. Everything we need is right here.
It
Everything we need,
really is.
and you know, I I often talk about the way that so many of us have it backwards. We think that someone or something outside of us is going to have us feel worthy. And so we end up just hitching our worthiness to someone else's wagon, which is a very precarious position to be in. And so it is about this return and this reclaiming of, you know, my worth and my value are not attached to what I do or what I achieve or what I produce. My worth is inherent just by being me.
Yeah. That's so powerful in itself, isn't it? Because then you're not at the mercy of anything. I mean, people are losing their jobs left, right, and center. It's such a fickle world out there, and if we and people are not 100% within themselves because of the anxiety. So I think we've got to have a solid belief and understanding and awareness of who we are and how amazing we are, and not in an
Yes.
egotistical way. It's just in a way that we're truly loving ourselves, and it's not impossible. I'm sure you've seen amazing cases in your work with just major transformation in people and
Absolutely.
yourself.
I was going to say, including myself.
Yeah. So for
Yeah.
everyone watching, I mean, look how amazing Nancy is. She's so powerful. I'm just like picking up on her energy over Zoom, and she's done all of this work and she's taken all of her own advice. And I would really get on her course, because it sounds like it's going to be a life-changing experience. And definitely buy the book, Jump and Your Life Will Appear. It's a beautiful book, and it's really practical, lots of exercises. There's an ebook available as well, and you can download it on your Kindle. So any final thoughts or words before I let you go, Nancy?
That's it. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too. Thank you so much, Nancy, and hopefully see you soon.
Yes.